Recording is now in progress. Wayne, I'm passing it off to you.
Thank you. Since we haven't gotten an introduction in here, I will introduce Puja Guha. She's a graduate of Penn, also did a master's degree at the London School of Economics. She's been involved in international development programs, a consultant for them, and lived all over the world. She's particularly known for Airman Legacy suspense thrillers, which have had international acclaim. And we're here to celebrate her new book, Sirens of Memory. So I think what we should do here is have Puja begin with a reading. Can you do that for us?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Wayne and Cyan. All right, I'll start off with just a little segment from the first chapter of the book. The scene takes place in Boston and in 2015. Miriam snuck down the stairs, her face damp with sweat. She was moving as fast as possible without making a noise, but this was her one chance. She couldn't let it pass. She crept past the door to her husband's room, where he bedded his other women, 2 or 3 of them, not that she knew or really cared. The door was open a crack, which meant that tonight he was alone, and her only chance was to get to safety before he realized that she was gone. As she moved down the hallway, his throaty snore faded, and she couldn't help but hope that tonight would be the last time she was subjected to that noise. When she reached the stairwell, she sped downstairs, keeping hold of the straps of her overstuffed backpack so that it wouldn't bounce too hard against her spine. The carpet muffled the sound of her feet, so she moved faster, with each step the door to safety growing closer and beckoning all the more intensely. She stopped at the last step and moved daintily onto the ceramic tile. Tarek was a light sleeper, and even the faintest noise had awoken him in the past. Her gaze darted between the kitchen, with the door to the yard to her left, and the front door past the foyer on her right. Tarek's bedroom overlooked the backyard, so she elected for the front, picking up speed once again. When she stepped into the foyer, her foot caught the edge of the thick rug, and she fell forward with a soft thud, catching herself on the carpeting on her hands and knees. She froze in place and looked up the stairwell, straining her ears. Had she woken him? If she had, her best bet was to stay quiet. He hadn't made much noise. He might simply turn over and go back to sleep. Please, she looked up at the ceiling and pleaded the universe to come to her aid. This has to end. I have to get away. After several moments of silence, she got to her feet, thankful that the Persian mashab rug her father had given her as her wedding gown and cushioned the fall. At least it was good for something. She covered the last few steps to the door and opened it. The hinges squeaked slightly, but she was too close to pause again. She closed the door and made it to the gate at the end of the driveway. Her heart sank as she realized the gate was bolted in place. Tarek must have noticed she'd left the padlock open and locked it before going to bed. The stainless steel was cold to the touch, and her fingers felt like lead as she fumbled with the combination. She tried it once, made a mistake, and had to start over, her head pounding to the rhythm of her racing heartbeat. Before she could stop herself, her eyes wandered back to the house, and she messed up again, restarting the 4-number sequence for the 3rd time. 22, 67, 83, 12, she whispered to herself this time. You can't make another mistake. This is your only shot. The reminder was painful. The
the light at the end of the tunnel could be extinguished at any time. On the fourth try, she succeeded, and with the padlock in hand, she moved the bolt handle back and forth to slide it out of the socket. She felt compelled to move even faster, but knew that the bolt creaked. A few seconds later, it was free, and she was outside the grounds. Her backpack snagged the bolt socket, and she had to slide the straps off to wrestle it free. It's going to be okay, she reminded herself. You're just a few steps from freedom. Miriam pulled the gate behind her and jerked the bolt back into place. It squeaked this time, but she willed herself to move. All she had to do was get the lock back on. Once she got to the main road at the end of the block, she could hail a taxi and she'd be free. She clicked the padlock into place, grabbed her backpack, and ran. Almost there. She could see the lights of the cars at the end of the street. When she reached the corner, she doubled over, panting. The backpack had never felt so heavy. What did you pack in it? A bunch of lead weights? You should have left some of your books. Miriam shook her head, silencing those thoughts, and waved for a taxi. The white cab approached. The half block it had to cover to get to her seemed endless, like the stretch of the Kuwaiti desert. The cab pulled to a stop, and she reached for the handle. The door opened, and the world changed. Did you think you were going to get away? Tarek said to her with a cunning smile. He motioned to the empty seat next to him. This will always be your place, right next to me. Miriam turned to run, but the asphalt beneath her turned to quicksand. And the more she moved her legs, the deeper she sank. Tarek emerged from the cab and held out his hand. You pretend to fear me, to want to run from me, but I'm the only one who knows you. Now, waist deep in the quicksand, Miriam surrendered, tears streaking her dust-stained cheeks. I can never get away from him. I can never get away from this life. The quicksand sucked her in, and she gasped her last breath as it passed her neck. She closed her eyes, and the congealed red mud enveloped her completely. This is how I die. Before the thought could register, the mud was gone, transformed into a thick cloud of ash, and she was falling. There was air around her again, followed by a loud crash as her body rammed into something glass. Her vision flashed red once again, this time a different shade, that of her own blood. A ringing filled her ears and transformed into a high-pitched siren. She could see an ambulance a few paces ahead, coming toward her, but it wasn't slowing down. The sirens reverberated, and she realized that she had to get out of the way. The ambulance wasn't coming for her, it was coming at her. It's going to ram into me. She tried to move, but her limbs refused. All that she could do was open her mouth. Help me, somebody help me. Ritika Ghosh bolted up awake.
Thank you. That's a dream that she's having, really a nightmare, which establishes the principal conflict in your novel. I think that does a great job of setting that up. I thought there are a few things I wanted to ask you. Let's do something with content first. I've got all sorts of structural questions too, because it's an interesting, for those of you listening, what's really interesting about this book is it's really got two plot lines, and one takes place at the time of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990. And then the other plot line is 2015, 2016, 25 years later. And so what happens is, in the novel, is we start in the 2015 timeline Miriam is still suffering the effects of this abusive relationship she had with her former husband. Her husband now, Raj, doesn't know anything about it. And so in that timeline, what happens is Miriam is trying to own herself because she's actually assumed the identity of Raj's dead wife, which is kind of another interesting plot aspect. This is very well plotted. I mean, it's intricately put together. And what happens with the two timelines is they parallel each other throughout the novel. And what happens is they come together at the end, of course, and they come together in an interesting way. Likewise, I thought it was terrific that you chose Sirens of Memory for the title, because what it does is it gives your story a kind of mythological dimension. Is that something that you consciously did? Because you've got, for example, it's sirens are, women are winged creatures, of course, and there's this mythological aspect to that. And you've got all these archetypal elements in your story. There's a flight out of captivity, right? Because in the 1990 timeline, the thing that Miriam and Raj are trying to do is get out of Kuwait. And the thing that allows Miriam to leave Kuwait is, as I said before, she assumes Raj's dead wife's identity. So she has her passport. She can actually get out that way. And it's interesting too, because there's a helper that who's Indian, and that's another you've got such an interesting blend of cultural things going on here. I mean, there's the Kuwaitis, there's this Indian influence. Obviously, you spent a lot of time there, right? You were in Kuwait and you were over in the Middle East. What was the genesis of this?
So I grew up mostly in Kuwait. And
really?
Yeah, so I lived there. Well, I was born there, but then we moved to Toronto when I was 2. And then we moved back to Kuwait when I was 9. And then I lived there until I was 17. So Kuwait definitely, even though I'm not Kuwaiti, my family's Indian and
Right.
Canadian and American now, but
Right.
Kuwait has always been with me, definitely a huge part of my identity all those years there. And since I was really little, I remember different stories people told about the Gulf War. So we weren't there at that time, but I remember being a little kid in Toronto, and I was trying to watch cartoons, and my dad wanted to watch the news, and I was like, "No, Dad, I want to watch cartoons." And he's like, "No, we need to watch this. This is important. I need to see what's happening in Kuwait." And
Right.
So from family, friends, I've heard lots of different stories, how people got out through Jordan, sort of Westerners, American and British people who hid out for a while until they could get evacuated, all the full spectrum of different stories. And it was absolutely with me through my life, I guess, in the back of my mind. And what inspired me to write this book was actually, so I watched this Hindi movie, it's called Airlift, and it's about the Indian evacuation from Kuwait. There were 150,000 Indians who were evacuated.
I did not know that. It's funny, that didn't make a large news splash over here, because I did follow that. I was at Stanford at the time, and we were all horrified at, the whole, it was a controversial move here in the United States for sure. But I mean, it was a shocking thing to watch. Anyway, so you were saying 150,000 Indians were airlifted out of Kuwait.
Yeah. So
that's enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the largest airlift in history, and
I'm shocked I didn't hear about it.
It's pretty crazy, because I knew about it, but at the same time, putting together the fact that it was the largest airlift and that
Right.
It's a pretty incredible effort. They, for example, the Indian Air Force definitely didn't have enough pilots to do that. So they used enough aircraft, excuse me. And so they used commercial planes. They used Air India's aircraft and things like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people had to be issued passports and things because they didn't have any of their documents when the Iraqis came across the border, and they weren't able to get any documents. So it was just a really interesting reminder of something that I'd heard about from a different angle growing up, and it just inspired that story. And it sparked some really wonderful, but also I'm sure some conversations that were difficult for some of my family friends. We talked about what they went through and when they decided to leave, and how they decided to leave and things like that. And I was really touched that they were willing to tell me all those things and go into the details that they did, because I think that a lot of the ways people talk about it is that we just didn't have to go to work for a while and it was a big party, but I think actually it was really scary, and that's the part that it's harder to talk about.
Well, I was wondering about that even as you were just relating this, because later when the timeline has gone quite a ways forward and Miriam is hiding out, moving around, the Iraqi soldiers are really violent. I mean, it seemed they attacked Kuwaitis. Were they also attacking Indian workers there too, or?
No. So people with Indian passports, unless they got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, were generally left alone.
Yeah, which makes it possible for the helper that you bring. What is her name? I forget the. Yeah, John B. That's right. So yeah, that's why she has some confidence moving around. Okay, that was one thing I was kind of curious about, because she's such a instrumental figure in their escape, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. Now the thing is, did you always envision this as a kind of two-pronged narrative from the first, or did it just come together that way, or?
It was always going to be two-pronged, but in the original draft, I wrote it as one long flashback in the middle of the modern day storyline. And then during the editing process, ended up switching it into that two timeline.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, because otherwise what you have is what's called a book-ended narrative, where you've got modern in the front, modern on the back end, and then in the middle you've got this whole kind of, which sometimes, some readers like that, but some, readers balk at that. So I think it's a good idea that you split them up that way and played them off. Not only that, the narrative builds as a result of that playing off each other. I thought it was. I really like the names of all the characters. I mean, Miriam, it's interesting when I looked it up. I mean, it's so many different interpretations of that name: drop of the sea, beloved, virtuous, pious, devoted to God, etc. All these different, depending on what group was using the name. Dinah too, being her friend, who's, like I said, this is so, for those of you listening, this book is very well woven together. What was your target audience for this? I was curious about that too. I mean, what were you thinking? I mean, was this kind of, just what do you think?
I have to admit, when I was writing it, I wasn't really thinking about the audience nearly as much as I was just very enveloped in the plot and the characters. I think the audience is basically anyone who sort of enjoys some form of suspense, I would say, especially with an interest in either historical aspects or international aspects, or both. That would be generally sort of, that's me, and so that's also what I write to in a lot of ways.
Right. Okay, that's great. I was also, I thought this was really interesting, the way you brought the players in this drama all together through the pictures on the phone. Tell our audience about that. I thought that was really a great way to do it. I thought that was terrific. I didn't see it coming. The other thing too is you dread it, because what happens is this Dinah is in Washington, D.C. She has a friend named Nadia. Nadia, turns out, has this crazy uncle who survived the conflict, and he's never named. But of course, you're thinking, could that really be Tarek? And you don't know that for the longest time. And then when you do find out it's Tarek, you think, well, what's the likelihood Tarek will find out that Miriam is still alive, because Tarek is thinking she died during the invasion. And then they meet for this 25th anniversary celebration of Kuwait survival in DC, right? And when it all comes together, it seems like Miriam's going to skate, happily enough. But Nadia takes some pictures of her pal, Dinah, whose pal is Miriam. And so they're together. And then the crazy uncle sees it. And the crazy uncle is, well, the vicious, misogynistic, terrible person. He really is kind of a psychopath, isn't he?
Absolutely.
He's a determined, busy person. And the interesting thing too is you've also, what I thought was really great is you've got this wonderful prize in it, which is the daughter, right? Miriam and Raj's daughter. And it turns out, you don't know this earlier either, that Aaliyah, is it Aaliyah?
Alia.
Alia. Alia is actually Tariq's daughter. I mean, he's the biological father. And so that makes it all the more pressing that when he discovers that his wife is alive, he also discovers that there's this daughter. And of course, he has all sorts of crazy perceptions about her. Well, they're kind of fundamentalist perceptions of her, right? Which makes him all that more dangerous, because he becomes inflamed.
Absolutely.
He becomes a kind of determined emissary of some imagined righteous god, and dangerous, right? But
sure.
in this, yeah, and then Nadia inadvertently really just shows Tariq pictures of her friends at this gala, and the whole thing is set off. What happens after that?
Well,
maybe you don't want to give away spoilers. Am I creating spoilers? I'm sorry, I haven't given it away. You don't know yet. See, it's all loaded right now. All sorts of,
See? Yeah, I mean, eventually it all catches up, and the past,
okay.
And the past really catches up to her.
Tune in to find out what happens. Yeah. His eyes all but glow in the dark,
Absolutely.
So how is this different from your Airman Legacy work? I mean, so how many Airman Legacy books have you written?
There are 3 so far that are out. The 4th one is ready, but the launch date will be, I think, sometime this summer. And then I'm working on the 5th book in the series now, which will be the end of the series.
That's great. So do you have the same process working on something like, because this is a standalone, right?
Yeah. My process has, sadly, for me, it has been different with every single book I have done. And I really thought by the time I wrote book 2 or 3 that I would have figured out one process and it would stick with me. I wouldn't have to figure it out again, but that's not been the case at all. And now it's just something that I accept. But so Sirens.
Well, okay, so I'm not going to let you get away with that. Okay, so you just accept it. So does that mean are you a person that writes partial outline or no outline at all, or do do you have some kind of initial like inciting incident or something like that? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I end up so like for example with Sirens, I wrote a very detailed outline, which was really unusual. I've never done that before.
So did you work out all the plotting aspects? Because I mean, the plotting is very clockwork, you know, I mean, the way things set up and pay off and everything. Yeah, you should see it, read it.
Yes, so I wrote a really detailed outline, and it's the fastest
Mhm.
book I've ever written. I wrote it in 5 weeks. I will
Wow.
never be able to do that again, sadly.
Yeah.
I'll think about that time and wish I could do that again. It's just all the stars sort of aligned. I took a
So was that fueled by coffee or tea? Or neither?
I do drink both, but no, not a crazy amount. No, it was just the outline was ready. I took a writer's retreat. So I was supposed to be in Austin for 2 weeks. Just a self-directed retreat. But
Are you in Denver
planned
now? Is that where you are?
Sorry?
Are you in Denver now? Is that where you are?
Yeah, I am.
Right. Okay. So you were down in Austin on a retreat. Yeah. I
Yeah,
interrupted.
and
My apologies. So go ahead.
oh no, that's okay. It was supposed to be about 2 weeks, and then I was gonna leave on a trip for some of my freelance work from there. My freelance work trip actually ended up being delayed by, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah, it must have been 3 weeks because I wrote the book in 5 weeks. And so I extended my time in Austin by another week. And then I went out and saw family in San Francisco for a couple of weeks. And I couldn't believe it, but once I got close to the end, I wasn't planning to finish it during this time period. But once I got close, I just really pushed through, and I finished it the day before I left on my work trip. So,
Wow, that's incredible.
yeah. But most of my other pieces, I mean, I've done for the first book in the Ahriman series, for example, I didn't use any outlining during the initial draft, and then I did some outlining while I was editing. And then I've done some more detailed outlining. For example, for this most recent fourth book in the Ahriman series. Well, for that, I thought that, replicating the process I used for Sirens, I wrote a detailed outline and I was excited about it. And then I started to write it and I hated it. As soon as I did like a few chapters in, it's like, no, throwing the outline out. And so I ended up kind of moving between sort of a pantsing process and then like going back to the outline a little bit and then back and forth. And that seems to be, so far at least, working okay for the last book in the spy thriller series. But, we'll just see. So that's what I mean when I say I've just accepted that my process is going to move around.
Well, I think that, a flexible process like that, I think, to me, makes all the sense in the world because you can't force things. If you force things, they become flat. So like I'm sure you're discovering aspects of character or even things that surprise you in plot line. It goes off in a different direction, right? Which is more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, what are you since I used to love old spy stuff. So what books have influenced you? I mean, do you read spy literature or was this just
I do, yeah. The biggest influence I'd say would be Frederick Forsyth. I really grew up with his books all through my kind of like teenage years and things. I was reading those books off my dad's bookshelf. And so a couple of books in particular would be The Day of the Jackal, of course, his most well-known work, I'd say. And then Icon, which is another one, which is a lot less well-known, but I remember just absolutely being so enthralled by that one. I was a sophomore in high school and I was supposed to be studying for my history final and I was reading Icon. But it covered most of the stuff for the Cold War part of my history test. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, I was curious too. I mean, with all the traveling that you do, you said, I think it mentioned you speak 5 languages. I mean, do you speak Hindi or Malayalam or Gujarati or?
Yeah. So my family's language is actually Bengali. We're from the northeast of India, but I do speak Hindi as well. Just
Yeah.
exposure to lots of family friends who spoke it all through growing up. So
Uh-huh.
I know I speak it with poorer grammar than they do, but Hindi has very complicated grammatical rules, and
Right.
unlike Bengali, which
Yes.
is very simple. So I often, I think, end up making a few grammatical errors here and there. But
I studied Hindi for a while, and I've got some, I call him my brata, Vikas, and he really laughed when he heard me because he said I was speaking in an idiom that was 100 years old. But, not the best, but
yeah, unfortunately, that happens a lot when we learn language in the classroom, I think.
right, exactly, right. He said, "You're effectively saying, 'Dear kind sir, could you direct me to the train station?'" Something to that effect. I was thinking, oh, that doesn't sound so good. Well, let's see. I was curious about, too, when you put the book together, um, how you decided on the aspects of Tarek's, character. I mean, he's really an abusive, dangerous person. And tell me more about that. I mean, he's your arch antagonist, right? I mean, he's
Absolutely.
the fuel for this whole thing. The second act of your book, which is great, which is actually the larger part of the body of your book, but it's really fueled by the ferocity of his beliefs, right? So what do you think about all that? I mean,
For the most part, it's how he appeared to me when I thought about the story. There's specific parts about what his transition to living in the US would be like, those kind of things that I thought about more and tweaked later. But the deep emotional parts of who he is, those didn't really change much. It's just how I saw it in my head. And I do think that, because this is a subject that people don't really talk about, that, it gives a place to hide for a lot of, for people who have been, for people who are abusive, for people who can, become that way. There's culturally, and especially in Eastern culture, actually, I think to a large extent, given a big place to hide, not on purpose by any means, but just because of the way divorce is looked upon, the way that gender roles are looked upon, the way that mental health is looked upon, all of that.
right. Which means that Miriam is really trapped. There isn't any kind of social, political, legal kind of recourse really, because all of that Tariq won't accept, right?
Yeah, and I mean, her situation is, it's definitely not representative of all Kuwaiti women or anything, but she is married off to him when she's 19, so she doesn't really have any of her own money. Her mom was her big personal advocate, but she's passed away, and her father's pretty awful as well. So it just sets her up to really, really be very trapped in this relationship. And then the only thing that really helps her to get out is, of course, her cousin, Dinah, and then realizing that she's pregnant and that.
Right. Well, it also really functions into that plot line too, that the Iraqis are invading. So there's this complete upheaval in the usual social order, right? Which allows, a certain amount of confusion in which she escapes, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that it's neat the way all that works together in your book, and all the elements amplify each other, and work toward the resolution of the story, which I haven't given away. You have to see it. Well, that's wonderful. So you said that you're from a family of architects, is that right? I mean, is that
I am,
what?
yeah. Both of my
So
parents are architects,
yeah.
and so many other family members too. Just architects, structural engineers, landscape architects.
Like civil
I'm very
engineering too, that kind of thing too, or
sorry. What did you say?
civil engineering too? Because I my sister's husband actually lived in India
Mhm.
for I think 15 years, and his father was brought over by the Ford Foundation. He was a civil engineer, so
Mhm.
they were in Delhi, I think. But yeah, so there's a lot of foreigners over there, well, everywhere actually around the world doing different projects for sure. So was that kind of the situation with your family too in Kuwait? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. So we were in Toronto, and my dad got offered a role on one of his old projects, one that was actually damaged during the Gulf War. And so he
I,
initially took the project because it was a great opportunity, and he went back to Kuwait, but it was only supposed to be just for the one project. And then fast forward 6 months, and it basically, I mean, there was so much more construction happening in the Middle East at that time than there was in Toronto. So my mom and I went back to Kuwait as well. And then it was still only supposed to be a couple of years at most. And then my parents didn't leave Kuwait until they retired. Back in 2017, they moved. So yeah, so 1994 to 2017 instead of, 2 years
wow,
maybe
right,
is how it ended up. Yeah.
very interesting. But did you like moving around? I mean, was that something you enjoyed? I mean, it's
I mean, I think there were
because
moments when it was more challenging, but we
Mhm.
always really enjoyed the travel. So it wasn't. So
Right.
even when we were in Kuwait, I was lucky enough that for school tournaments like swim meets and track meets and things like that, I got to travel all over Cairo, Dubai, Doha, Athens. Like it was really, I was lucky enough to have a lot of great opportunities. And then my parents also had the travel bug big time. So we traveled a lot as a family, and then
That's wonderful. Wow.
and then I've kept it up even more. So well,
Good for you. That's
pre-COVID, but yeah.
right. I know, me too. I've been kind of a crazy traveler too. I mean, there's nothing like that to,
Mhm.
go somewhere else and meet people that are really different. And that's the best, I think.
Absolutely.
Hey, maybe we should get some questions from the audience. Should we try that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I see some messages in the chat. If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. All right.
Let's
Okay,
see.
so-
Oh, there it is right there. Okay, we've got 7 questions. Let me see if I can click on it. Yes, I can. Okay. All right. Okay, is the audience shy? I don't know. Okay.
Looks like Cyan has one question in there.
Yeah. What's the research process like for this book? Okay.
So the research process, I did do some online searching, things to clarify some of the dates and stuff, but the biggest part was really talking to family friends directly about what they went through. And that's where, you get certain details that you'd never find online. Like one of my, I call him uncle, but he's not actually my uncle, but he's a close family friend. He said that none of the Iraqi soldiers, most of them were super duper young. They were like kids, like teenagers, and most of them didn't have real shoes on. They were wearing flip-flops. Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah, so
See,
things.
I love details like that. Details like that are, yeah.
Yeah, it makes everything so much more real, for sure.
Let's see, do we have anything?
It looks like
Anybody
Cyan
else?
also asked, what was the oddest thing? Oh, sorry, I I took the words out of your mouth.
Please, no, go ahead. I mean, it's kind of hard. When I click on it every once in a while, I get an advertisement or something. It just kind of, anyway, go ahead. What's the oddest thing?
The oddest thing I had to search for information on. I mean, the oddest thing was, I'd say, wasn't really a search per se for information, but it was really thinking about what the process of Tariq hunting down Miriam would be like. So, he's found out she's alive, but then how does he actually find her? He's not a super tech savvy guy who can just, hack into her, or something like that. And so thinking about what that process would be like, and how he would consider trying to find how he would get the idea to get a private investigator, and then how he would even find one, and then where it would all go from there, and what details would come out, and how he would ask those questions. So that was, I think, the oddest part of that process, like really trying to think about it from the angle of someone who wouldn't really be super comfortable with technology and like how they would be going about that, but also need to get to that result. So,
Yeah, right. Yeah, that really makes sense too. That's one of those considerations, because granted his personality, as you said, he wouldn't be a super tech savvy kind of person. You wouldn't think he would be anyway. So as you said, I mean, how do you facilitate his locating her, right? Which I think that worked perfectly, actually. He seems altogether capable in the analog world, right? So, yeah. Well, that's all right. I was going to ask you, what about your process of working with your editor and all that? How did that go? I mean, was you were pretty much done when you delivered your manuscript, or did you have to nip and tuck here and there, or?
I mean, there were definitely changes that were substantive, but not not massive, not changing fundamentals in the story. But the biggest thing that I worked on during the editing process was pacing. That's one of the things that really improved once you split the timeline, once it wasn't a flashback in the middle of the book, because then you could really use the contrasts between the storyline, like in more
they feed each other. Yeah,
proximity. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. I thought that worked very well. In fact, I like that too. I've got a book that's got the same kind of structure, and the same thing. Initially, it was just this large section of backstory, which was actually dramatized, so it's not backstory. But then, you have this bookended narrative, which some people are happy with. I like those kinds of things myself, but a lot of readers find that's they're too anxious to get back to the present. So
yeah.
I was thinking, we were talking about finding some way that Tarek could locate Miriam. I mean, you must be dealing with those kinds of tech issues too with your Airman series, right? I mean, you know, if a spy. Are you a kind of computer savvy person? I mean, do you do that kind of thing? Or?
I'm not. I mean, I'm somewhat, but not super computer savvy.
Oh, right.
But with the
You're not
spy
writing
books,
your own
it's a little
code.
bit.
And,
With the spy books, it's a little bit easier. One, because I set them, well, in the near future, so it allows me a little bit of room. But on top of that, there's no, you know, we don't have a James Bond car in my spy thriller series, but at the same time, I do use certain small innovations, which I think could be possible in an agency with a lot of money, for example.
oh,
like
that's very interesting.
projected screens
Okay.
and things like that,
Yeah.
from a tablet, you know, so it's a hovering screen, things like that.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I mean, it's still tricky though, for sure, because certain things have to be discoverable, but at the same time, the process has to be reasonable. And I also want to avoid, there's, I don't know, when I think about it, there's this one book that I read a long time ago where the whole thing just the final climax is just centered around somebody figuring out this code, which I don't have a lot of big code breaking sequences. That's not a focus of my work, but I just remember this because the code seemed so obvious to me. And in that particular book, I just remember being like, how can they not be figuring it out? Just spinning the pages, like, and then they finally got it. It was 15 pages later or something. I don't remember exactly, but approximately a while. And I just, so I want to avoid moments like that for my readers as well, where it's like we miss something, or we make something that's not necessarily obvious, but not that difficult into something really difficult.
Exactly, right. Well, I mean, the thing is, you've got to parallel the reader's experience, right? So if it goes on too long and the reader thinks, I figured that out 20 pages ago, and what's wrong with these idiots? You've got a problem, right?
For sure.
Oh, that's fun. I can't wait to read some of that. That's going to be great because I love that stuff. Especially you've got your near future stuff in there too, which I read a lot of sci-fi when I was a kid. So, but you know, it was what they call hard sci-fi, you know. So again, kind of realistic things that might actually happen, or you know, that sort of thing. So that's great. So I mean, is that primarily your focus now? You're going forward, the Airman legacy. You said you've got a fifth one. Are you going to just, you know, are you going to have like Sue Grafton 25 of them? Or?
No, I think I'll end the main series at 5 books. I have a couple of ideas for some potential spin-offs. A secondary character who's become very near and dear to me. I feel like he could have his own couple of books. But I definitely write in the order of which that I sort of feel inspired to write. So that's why, you know, I took time in the middle of my series to write Sirens as a standalone. But right now I'm pretty excited about writing the last book in the series.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, after that, we'll see whether I want to write spin-offs or whether I want to write some other stuff that I've got ideas for.
Okay, great. Yeah. Is your protagonist in the Airman legacy man, woman?
A woman. So it's really a series that revolves around 2 protagonists. One is a former spy. She's an Iranian American who can't seem to get out of the spy game. She leaves a few times and keeps getting pulled back in. And then the other character, he is also of Iranian descent, but he starts out, he's a much darker story. He is an assassin
And the first book is about them working against each other, but then after that, they sort of have to work together on different things. And that's a huge part of how his character arc plays out,
Good.
how he turns into that and then turns into something else afterwards. So.
Interesting. Okay, so do they in some ways like play sidekick to each other then? Does it work that way too? You know, that exchange of information where you have, you know, two characters. It's kind of a classic setup, you know, because it allows you to, you know, divulge information and exchange things and all that, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely one of the story devices for information. There's also, it helps bring out a lot of the emotional depth in both of the characters, because they really
Right, they play off each other, right?
absolutely, and they have their own sort of deep-seated issues, and that becomes a lot more visible when they're interacting with each other.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I mean, because then you have kind of a composite whole between the two characters, but they, you know, are in conflict in some ways too, right? Like you said, initially, they're wholly in conflict, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's fun too to work with, isn't it?
It is. It is. Absolutely.
Well, any other questions from anybody or I guess
Do you want
anything?
to take a second just to talk a little bit about you and what you're working on? Just to
Oh,
we really
sure.
get introductions, I feel like.
Well, sure. Well, I just had a book come out last week, which
Oh,
is,
congratulations.
oh, thanks. Yeah, The Red Canoe. There's something going to follow that too. I think that's my 10th book, The Red Canoe. And so I've got a few forthcoming. I work in Hollywood. I've worked in Hollywood since 1996. And so we did have something that was going forward with HBO. The idea was to turn it into a 3-season series. So that's another thing we were working on. And then the interesting thing was the purchaser for that was fired, and then he went over to Apple. He went over to Apple TV. Yeah, so this thing is, you know, it's not unusual in Hollywood, you know, the way this happens. But yeah, you know, I'm going to be down. Are you? You're going to be at the Left Coast Crime too, aren't you? Did I see
Not
that?
this year, unfortunately. Usually,
Okay.
yes.
Oh,
I was supposed to be in Argentina at that time.
really?
Um,
Yeah, well, that sounds like fun.
yeah, it turns out I'll probably be going to Argentina a week later, but it's all a bit too much to.
Yeah. What are you doing in Argentina? I've always wanted to go there.
Oh, it's an amazing spot. I mean, well, I've only been to Buenos Aires so far, but it is really a wonderful city. Absolutely. So I'm going to be working on this is with my freelance work, with the World Bank. We're designing a program to fund connecting, so Argentina has a really well-developed research space in biotech, nanotech, high tech, like really, really well-developed research for technology, but on the commercialization side, like actually getting those products out to the market, those connections between the researchers and potential companies that might actually be able to produce what they've discovered, that link is more challenging. So that's what the project that I'm going to be working on is going to be funding. So helping get those researchers to connect to private companies that might actually be able to produce their work and things like that.
Okay, so no doubt, I mean, all the preliminary work's been done, but now you are going to do a face-to-face, right? That's the idea. I mean, that's why you would be traveling.
Yeah. So a big part is, so the program is implemented by it's called Agencia. It's a Argentinian government agency, basically, that focuses on science, technology, and innovation. So we're going to go and work with them directly and meet some of the potential beneficiaries. And
Do you speak
just-
Spanish by any chance, or is that one of your languages? Or?
It is not, unfortunately. I started learning it a couple of years ago, actually, when I first went down there. So actually now 3 years ago, because it was just before COVID. And then sort of got sidetracked after that. It's so much easier to learn a language when you hear it than when you're trying to learn it from a book or from an app these days on the phone. So I'll have to pick that back up. I did learn some Portuguese when I was working in Lusophone Africa. So I speak French, so a lot of it
language, yeah, right. I
know. But at the same time, so a lot of it can be understood more easily, but when I'm trying to speak, it's a lot harder. It's like just trying to think about all those, all the vocabulary.
My family speaks, my one sister speaks 8 languages, and
Wow.
I've been around foreign languages my whole life. And my German's horrendous, but I worked on it. I should have done Romance languages. I think that would have been more useful and had some kind of broader, Well, I did actually. I studied Spanish when I was in this pilot program when I was just in grade school. But then, as always, this state legislature decided to defund foreign language. It's, the way they always cut those things, which was too bad, but anyway. Well, it's been great talking to you. I mean, I think this is just really a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed your book, Sirens of Memory. I thought that was really wonderful. Especially being a writer, I appreciated how it was put together. I'm astounded that you wrote it in as short a time as you did. But I mean, as you said, every once in a while you get lucky and things come together like that. In fact, actually, my book, Don't Think Twice, I was at Yaddo, and I basically wrote the first draft of that thing in 3 weeks because that's what as much time I had. Yeah, but then I had to revise it quite a bit and tinker around with it, but still, it was one of those things like being shot out of a cannon. You think, I'm here. And if you know anything about Yaddo, have you ever been there to Yaddo?
No, actually.
Well, why don't you apply and go there? You'd love it. It's really fun. There's a mansion. You get your own room. Someone in the past, the way they did it was they'd bring a lunch by and they'd set it in front of your door so you could just work all day. And then they had these wonderful dinners at night, and there's this whole contingent of artists. It's not just writers. So there's painters, sculptors, architects, just a whole host of artists, people that do performance arts, singers, and then they have these elaborate dinners, and you're close to Saratoga Springs, so you can go in and watch the horse races and things like that. It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, you're a good candidate for it too. You really are, because
Thank you.
They like to host a diverse group of people, right? So, that would be just the thing. Yeah. Yeah, you pronounce it not Yaddo, it's Yaddo as in shadow,
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
thank you. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah. All right. Well, where's our moderator? I mean, is Cyan around or?
I think they must have gotten disconnected.
I guess it's just us.
Yeah.
And your million fans.
Well, thank you everybody so much for joining.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Wayne. And
it's been a pleasure. It's just really terrific. It's wonderful to run into someone who's doing this kind of international, multicultural thriller stuff. I think that's just terrific. So, yeah, pleasure.
Oh, the same, absolutely. Thank you, and thanks to everyone who listened in.
And I guess it's time to wrap up, but oh, and thanks to Cyan and Chevalier's books, of
Yes,
course.
yes. Thank you to Chevalier's books. That's right. And Cyan. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll sign out with that.
All right.
But I hope
Bye,
I
Wayne.
can see that Left Coast Crime someday. All right.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely, it'll be back on my regular circuit starting next
Okay.
year for sure.
All right. Well, good luck with your new work.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.